Shalom, and welcome to the Hebrew of Israel. For today's episode, it's titled, What Did Joktanites Look Like? Don't forget to subscribe, click the bell, and like the video, and leave a comment for more information. But before we get too deep into the video, first I want to tell you guys about my social media platforms. So I have a Clubhouse account, and we can actually talk to one another on it. I also host Clubhouse rooms every now and then where I might talk about history and genetics of the Middle East and Africa. I have a Twitter page, a Facebook account, and a Facebook page, as well as a Instagram, all titled The Hebrew of Israel. And what I typically do on these platforms is post upcoming videos as well as slides for my presentations. And so just be on the lookout for all of that on my social media platforms. And if you want to support me financially for the channel, you can look at my Patreon as well as my PayPal and my GoFundMe. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with the video. If you follow the Book of Jubilees, you see that Eber married Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod. Nimrod is the son of Cush, whom Cushites, Nilo-Saharan/Nilotes come from, and Cush is the son of Ham, whom indigenous Paleo-Africans come from. And for information on that, check out my video, Eber and Azurad, who are the descendants of Cush, son of Ham. Eber is an Asiatic, but Asiatics of the Semitic race seem to have been dark-skinned in the past as well. And for information on that as well, check out my video, What Did Proto-Semites Look Like? Therefore, it is likely when following the narrative of Eber and Azurad that Joktan would have been dark-skinned and half Hamitic African. Book of Jubilees, chapter 8, verse 9 through 10. Eber, and he took unto himself a wife, and her name was Azurad, the daughter of Nimrod. She bare him a son, and called his name Peleg. The book of Jubilees mentions the name Nimrod, the Greek form of Nimrod, only as being the father of Azurad, the wife of Eber, and mother of Peleg. This account would thus make Nimrod an ancestor of Abraham and hence all Hebrews. Genesis chapter 10, verse 8, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. And this is a slide that pretty much breaks down who the Cushites would be. So Cush, a son of Ham, descendant, also a descendant of Ham, living in the southern Nile Valley. And this is why I would say that Nilotic people would be the best case for the descendants of Cush, son of Ham. So a proto-Nilotic unity separate from an earlier undifferentiated Eastern Sudanic unity is assumed to have emerged by the 3rd millennium BC. The Eastern Sudanic unity must have been considerably earlier still, perhaps around the 5th millennium BC. The original locus of the early Nilotic speakers was presumably east of the Nile in what is now South Sudan. The Proto-Nilotes of the 3rd millennium BC were pastoralists, while their neighbors, the Proto-Central Sudanic peoples, were mostly agriculturalists. Nilotic people practice a mixed economy of cattle pastoralism, fishing, and seed cultivation. The genetic and linguistic studies have demonstrated that Nubian people in southern Sudan and southern Egypt are an admixed group that started off as a population closely related to Nilotic people. Nubians are considered to be the descendants of the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley, who later formed the kingdom of Cush, which included Kerma and Meroe, and the medieval Christian kingdoms of Macharia, Nabotia, and Almadai. Excuse me for my mispronunciations. These studies suggest that populations closely related to the Nilotic people long inhabited the Nile Valley as far south as far as southern Egypt in antiquity. And I believe this would be your ancient Cushites from a biblical perspective. It will be Nilotic people, Nilo-Saharan people, Nubians, the kingdom of Cush. It's even in the name. And so the Nilot phenotype, specialized African type, native to the swamps and savannas of the Upper Nile region of southern Sudan and adjacent countries. With their black skin, they belong to the darkest people on the earth. Long heads, facial features coarse with a rather wide nose, full lips, and kinky hair. Nilots seem to be a relatively old group that might have extended further east into Ethiopia during prehistoric times. And most Nilots have the Y haplogroup A marker, and as you can see, it is heavily within Sudan and southern Egypt and other parts of Africa. So these will be your Cushites from Cush, son of Ham. And this is the lineage showing that Eber and Azurad would have came together, this unity between Shem going down to Eber and this unity between Ham going to Azurad. Shem or Faxad, Canaan, Shelah to Eber, and then Ham, Cush, Nimrod, and Azurad. This Shemitic man getting with this Hamitic woman, giving birth to Peleg and Joktan. Basically, they will be a split between African and Asian. So Joktan would have looked African because his mother was a Cushite. Joktanites could have also looked African or like a mixed group of African people. Joktanites may have looked like Natufians. Natufians are considered to be ancient and somewhat pure Arabians. Indigenous Arabians descend from Natufians, specifically Arabians near the Red Sea where Joktan descendants settled. Furthermore, Natufians genetically have a high percentage of ancient Arabian DNA. So here's the understanding of Joktan. Joktan, Yoktan, Quoktan, or Koktan. Joktan's descendants are called Joktanites. There is an Arab tradition that Joktan was the ancestor slash progenitor of all the purest Arabian tribes of central and southern Arabia. According to ATS Bible Dictionary, Joktan, son of Eber, and by him connected with the Hebrews and other Shemitic families, he is believed to be the Koktan or Yoktan to whom Arabian writers trace their purest and most ancient genealogies. According to Easton's Bible Dictionary, there is an Arab tradition that Joktan, Arab Koktan, was the progenitor of all the purest tribes of central and southern Arabia. And so Genesis chapter 10, verse 24 through 31 says, To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begot Almodad, Sheleph, Mazoreth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzel, Diklah, Obel, Abamel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Obabed. All these were the sons of Joktan. And here's the key thing to keep in mind. Verse 30. And their dwelling place was from Misha, as you go towards Sephar, the mountain of the east. And so Misha to Sephar, Misha would be in modern day Jordan, and Sephar would be in modern day Yemen. This follows along with the migration of Semitic languages, showing that this map shows Semitic languages originating in the Levant, spreading down the Red Sea into the Horn of Africa and Arabia. And here's a genetic paper showing the highest frequency of haplogroup of Natufian ancestry being in the Red Sea region. Here is the F group, by the way, as you can see. The highest amount of Natufian is around the Red Sea region. And most Yemeni and Saudi Arabian peoples have high amounts of Natufian ancestry, as you can see in red, have very high amounts. This study projecting ancient ancestry in modern-day Arabians and Iranians, a key role of the past exposed Arabo-Persian Gulf on human migrations. It reads, modern Saudi Arabian and Yemeni samples clustered tightly in the lower left quadrant, overlapping with the three Natufian samples, and were close to the Levant PPNB, pre-Pottery Neolithic B, and PPNC, pre-Pottery Neolithic C, and the Levant Bronze Age samples. So modern day Saudi Arabians and Yemeni people are very close to Levantine populations. It says 2/3 of the West Arabo-Persians populations have ancestry shared with the Natufian type of the Levants. And here's another study going into this, the genomic history of the Middle East. It says when we substitute Levant Neolithic with Natufians as source of ancestry in the Middle East, we found that Arabians could be successfully modeled. So Arabians are successfully modeled when it comes to Natufians. It says Arabia has higher African and and Natufian-like ancestries, which is interesting because that kind of could fit with the idea of Joktan being a split between African and Asiatic. So it's very interesting. It says, in addition, our models suggest that Arabians could have derived their ancestry from Natufian-like local hunter-gatherer populations instead of Levantine farmers. And this paper right here deals with the breakdown of the Natufian DNA. So the Natufian sample consists of 61.2% Arabian, 21.2% North African, 10.9% Western Asian, and 6.8% Omotic ancestry, which Omotic are East African people. And so this is interesting because basically, genetically, Natufians are a split between Asiatics and Africans. And here is, by the way, is a reconstruction of a Natufian from the region of the Levant near Jericho. This is what a Natufian would look like. And as you can see, the Natufian zone is pretty much from Syria all the way to the Negev in Israel, near Sinai. And I believe this is what a Natufian would look like in the flesh. I believe Common's features is very similar to the Natufian. If you look at the nose, the cheekbones, even the eyes and the lips, the ears, it seems to me that it's very similar. And so here's a very old paper dealing with the Natufians. This is from Sir Arthur Keith. And so basically, he says that they were clearly a Negroid people, said Sir Arthur, with wide faces, flat noses, and long, large heads. They may have been the ancestors, or they may have been the ancestors of the Arabs or Semites of biblical times, in Sir Arthur Keith's opinion. Several features stand out quite definitely. They were a long-headed people. The pre-dynastic Egyptians, thirdly, their faces were short and wide. Fourthly, they were prognathinous, with a projecting jaws. Fifthly, their nasal bones were not narrow but high, but formed a wide low arch, which means they basically had a wide nose. And so this source, also dealing with Keith, says, but with a distinct bias towards the African variety of that stock represented by the pre-dynastic people of Egypt. A Natufian skull pictured in Bolaskin 2003, exhibiting many features consistent with recent African ancestry. And as you can see, that is a Natufian skull, and it's very long, dolichocephalic basically. Descriptions of Natufian and PP in pre-Pottery Neolithic remains consistently report post-brachiometric depression, among other features consistent with sub-Saharan African ancestry. So this is from Keith as well. And he's talking about when it comes to the features, by the way, of the Natufians. And it says, has led me to the conclusion that all represent the same racial stock. Remarkable was the nasal development of this cave people, often almost Negroid-like in the flattening of the nasal bridge and in the width of the internal orbital septum, such as might herald the pronounced nasal development of the later Semitic races. So basically, saying that the nasal cavity of the Natufians is very Negroid-like, and this could have basically created the quote unquote Semitic type when it comes to the features in the nose. And this quote as well deals with the Natufians, is perhaps one of the most latest ones. The questionable contribution of the Neolithic and the Bronze Age to the European craniofacial form. It says it is a further surprise that the Epipaleolithic Natufian of Israel, from whom the Neolithic realm was assumed to arise, has a clear link to sub-Saharan Africa. Interestingly enough, however, the small Natufian sample falls between the Niger-Congo group and the other samples used. This placement suggests that there may have been a sub-Saharan African element in the makeup of the Natufians, as shown in Figure 1. The Somalis and the Egyptian Bronze Age sample from Naquata may also have a hint of a sub-Saharan African component. And so here's a chart sample showing you how very close phenotypically the Niger-Congo is with the Natufian, and even then the prehistoric slash recent Northeast African. So the Natufian and Niger-Congo is very close. And here's another chart though showing that Natufian is in between Niger-Congo and the prehistoric slash recent Northeast Africa. So basically their phenotype would have been something in between that. And so if we if the late Pleistocene Natufian sample from Israel is the source from which that Neolithic spread was derived, then there was clearly a sub-Saharan African element present of almost equal importance as the late prehistoric Eurasian element. So Joktanites and Joktan may have looked African if they descend from Natufians. Natufians, of course, being the ancestors of indigenous Arabians like Joktan. So Joktan slash Joktanites may have also looked Proto-Arabian. Proto-Arabians would have been the ancient pre-Islamic Arabian populations. Since Joktan is the ancestor of Arabians, then this too is another great example. So this is from The Arabs by Bertram Thomas, and he says, the original inhabitants of Arabia then, according to Sir Arthur Keith, one of the world's greatest living anthropologists, who has made a study of the Arab skeletal remains, ancient and modern, were not the familiar Arabs of our own time, but a much more darker people. A proto-Negroid belt of mankind stretched across the ancient world, from Africa to Malay, giving rise to the Hamitic peoples of Africa, to the Dravidian peoples of India, and to the intermediate dark people inhabiting the Arabian Peninsula. And so this quote also goes into the phenotype of the original Arabian population. The book is called The Negro and the New World. And so it says, it is quite conceivable that the great peninsula of Arabia was once populated by, as far as its natural conditions allow it, by a primitive Negro stock. And this is from Henry Field, Anthropology, Volume 4. And it says, among these Negroid features, which may have been counted normal in Arabs, are the full, rather everted lips, shortness and width of nose, certain blanks in the beards or in the bearded areas of the face, between the lower lip and the chin and the cheeks, large Lucius Grazel-like eyes, a dark brown complexion, and a tendency for the hair to grow in ringlets. Although the Arab of today is sharply differentiated from the Negro of Africa, yet there must have been a time when both were represented by a single ancestral stock. In no other way can the prevalence of certain Negroid features be counted for in the natives of Arabia. So basically, what he's saying that you still can find some of these Arabian populations with very interesting features similar to Negroes, and Henry Field is basically saying that both the Negro people in Africa and that Arabian people in Arabia, they likely had like a single ancestral population that split, which is very interesting. And so this quote right here goes into the original Arabs. It's the Encyclopedia Britannica. And so it says, regarding the origin of the Arab race, a third is the name Hamir or Dusky, a circumstance pointing, like the former, to the African origin. A fourth is the Himyaric language, are African in character, often in identity. Indeed, the dialect commonly used along the southeastern coast hardly differs from that used by the Somali Africans on the opposite shore. The pure Arabs differs from that of the north. Sixthly, the pre-Islamic institutions of Yemen and its allied provinces, its monarchies, courts, armies, and serfs bear a marked resemblance to the historical Afro-Egyptian type, even to modern Abyssinians. Seventhly, the physical conformation of the pure-blooded Arab inhabitants of Yemen, Hadramaut, and Oman. Other practors point to an African rather than an Asiatic direction. Lastly, the extreme facility of marriage which exists in all classes of the southern Arabs with the African races, the fecundity of such unions, and the slightness or even absence of any caste feeling between the dusky pure Arab and the still darker native of modern Africa may be regarded as pointing to the direction of a common community of origin. So basically, he's saying that the people in both sides of the Red Sea might have a common origin, both in Yemen and Arabia, and also in the Horn of Africa, which is kind of what I went over when it comes to Sheba, son of Joktan, which literally goes into that. How Joktanites would have migrated from the Horn, or from Yemen into the Horn of Africa. So Henry Field, in his Ancient and Modern Man in Southwestern Asia, says Dravidian and Arab have in them an inheritance from a common stock, an inheritance which has been retained more completely by the natives of India than by people of Arabia. And I have, of course, on the screen to the right at the top is a Dravidian, and Marshall's and Von and Herfield's remarkable insight has the support of contemporary ethnography and modern genetic research. Sir Arthur Keith and Dr. Wilson Moran Corrigan in their description of the racial characteristics of the southern Arabs says that the Arabian Peninsula was at one time occupied by a people intermediate to the Somalis on the one hand and to the Dravidian peoples of India on the other. And of course, on the bottom is a picture of a Somali. And so basically, what all these old anthropologists are saying is that the original Arab stock seems to have looked something in between like a Dravidian or a Somali, which is very interesting. So, a Dravidian and Somali is like a good example of what an ancient Arab, according to the bones that we find and to their research of certain indigenous tribes, that this is kind of the phenotype that we're getting with. So, Joktan and Joktanites may have looked African if they are Proto-Arabs. They likely are Proto-Arabs, and the first pre-Islamic people of the Arabian Peninsula. So there are various historians who talk about Joktanites, and historians even say that Joktanites looked African or Hamitic in phenotype, such as this quote right here. Right here, it says, "The people of Defar are of the Joktan tribe, the sons of Joktan, mentioned in Genesis. They are of Hamitic, or African, rather than Arab types." So they look more Hamitic or African. And here is a chief from Defar. And by the way, this image comes from the ancient and modern inhabitants of Arabia. This is a chief from the Defar. And as the quote just said, that Joktanites look more like Defar people. This is basically what a Joktanite, would look like. And so this book right here, Prehistoric Nations, this is by John D. Baldwin. And so it says, in the traditions, Saba, described as a descendant of Joktan, is the next personage who represents an important historical epoch. The legends connect him with the southwestern quarter of the peninsula and with a kingdom that seems to have included Yemen, the Hadranot, and Hejaz, and other districts. Hamir, a descendant of Saba, is another royal personage to whom special but unexplained historical importance is attached. And so this book is African Presence in Early Asia. It says the Encyclopedia Britannica gives a description of the physical qualities of the original Arabs, the inhabitants of Yemen, Hadranat, Oman, and the adjoining districts in the shape of the heat, color, length, and slenderness of the limbs, the scantiness of the hair point to an African origin. They claim descent from Joktan. These Yemenite kings, descendants of Joktan and Hamir the Dusky, a name denoting African origin. The general characteristics of the institution of Yemen bore considerable resemblance to the neighboring ones of the Nile Valley. So basically, these people who claim the descent of Joktan, or Joktan, they look African. And so this is from the Nations of the Southeast. This is by Archibald Skazy. And he says, the people of Sheba belong to the South Arabian stock. In both blood and language, they differed considerably from the Semites of the north. Physically, they bore some resemblance to the Egyptians, and it has been suggested that the Egyptians were originally immigrants from their shores. Some of them crossed the Red Sea and founded colonies in Africa and in modern Abyssinia, where they built cities and introduced the culture of their former homes. Like the Egyptians and the Babylonians, they were a literate people. Inscriptions are still scattered thickly among the ruins of their homes, written in the letters of the alphabet, which is usually termed Phoenician. So basically, this quote is even saying that the descendants of Joktan from Sheba, that they actually look like Egyptians, which is fairly interesting. A lot of these quotes seem to be alluding to the fact that that these early Arabians basically looked a lot like people from the Nile Valley, or that they looked African Egyptian, stuff like that. And of course, I have on the image to the right very early forms of Egyptians from their murals. This is from the 18th dynasty, but this quote even goes into it. The ancient Egyptians and the origin of civilization. E. Eliot Smith. It says, there is considerable mass of evidence to show that there was a very close resemblance between Proto-Egyptians and the Arabs. It says that, and basically to give you the description of what a Proto-Egyptian looks like in his book, the Proto-Egyptians, but there can be no doubt, however, that their dark hair was associated with dark eyes and a bronze complexion. Wall pictures, and statues with black eyes and ruddy brown skin. Brown skins and iris of the black or dark brown color, as the living population of northeastern Africa, which most nearly resembles the Proto-Egyptians in stature, have a coppery brown skin color. We must look upon the old Egyptian customs of representing men of their nationality with red skin. So basically, he's saying that Proto Egyptians were dark haired, dark eyed, and brown complected with, a reddish brown complexion. And so this actually goes a little bit deeper into what Elliot Smith said about Proto Egyptians. It says, this is from General History of Africa. And particularly when we note once more that Mediterranean is a synonym for white, is not a synonym for white. Elliot Smith's brown or Mediterranean race being rather the mark. Elliot Smith classes these Proto-Egyptians as a branch of what he calls the brown race, which is the same as Sergey's Mediterranean or Eurafrican race. The term brown in this context refers to skin color and is a euphemism for Negro. And for more information on the Eurafrican and the brown race, check my video out, What Did Proto-Semites Look Like? But I cover it a little bit here as well. So basically, this book is from The Passing of the Great Race. The Mediterranean race was first defined by Sergi, who also calls it Eurafrican. The Mediterranean race originated in Africa and is closely related to the Negro, both being long-scoped peoples descended from a common stock, the Eurafrican. And so basically, what I'm sort of seeing is that Proto Arabs could have looked like northern Ethiopic people. So, what's the description of that? The common along the Red Sea coast and the Nile Valley from Egypt to Eritrea and deep into the Ethiopian highlands, often blended with Arabs and Yemenites that arrived in prehistoric times, sometimes in Arabia as well. Dark, sometimes medium, bronze brown skin, and tightly curly hair. So this is like the best example of what a proto Arab could have looked like. So Joktan slash Quachtanites could have looked like Hamites. Joktanites are described as being phenotypically African from various and numerous historians, and also looking like Dravidians. So Joktanites seem to have settled mostly in southern Arabia, and southern Arabians have been described as looking like Horn Africans as well. Therefore, Joktanites could have looked no different than people in the Horn or in southern Arabia. So this is a book that actually covers this. It says the people of Arabia belong to two distinct and apparently different races. The Arabs of South Arabia, which is what we're dealing with Joktan, are smaller, darker, coarser featured, and nearly beardless. All authorities agree that the southern Arabians are nearly related by origin to the Abyssinians, who we know to be Ethio-Semitic people from my video dealing with Sheba, son of Joktan. So the Habashas are Abyssinians, a Semitic language-speaking peoples mainly found in the highlands of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Some within diasporic communities have adopted the term to refer to all people of Eritrean and Ethiopian origin. So as you can see on the image, we have Habasha people, and that is another phenotype, how Joktanites could have looked, since they both look the same on both sides of the Red Sea. Here is another book called Racial Types of South Arabia, dealing with the phenotype. It says racial affinities of the South Arab lie in Northeast Africa. A Negroid strain occurs in the belt from Africa through South Arabia to Malaysia, including the Dravidians of southern India. So again, we're seeing that these Arabs in the south of Arabia could have looked like Africans and Dravidians. So, Joktan and Joktanites could have looked no different from Southern Arabians, Horners, and Dravidians. Sabaeans is another great example for what Joktan and Joktanites could have looked like. Sabaean statues look very, very similar to modern Ethiopians. So here are two Sabaean statues. Look at their features, look at their nose, lips, their hair, particularly look at their hair. And so here is a Sabaean statue right next to a Ethiopian. And here's another one. And look at the hair texture and look at the nose. To me, when I look at these images of Sabaean statues, they look extremely similar to Ethiopians. Because I am of the opinion, like many others, that Sabaeans came into Ethiopia, and a lot of the descendants of the Ethio-Semitic people are the descendants of the Southern Arabian Sabaean peoples. But all of these images strongly match, if you ask me. That these are the same people. Both sides of the Red Sea, they look the same. So Joktanites could have looked like Sabaeans, who look like modern Ethiopians. And Joktanites could have also looked like modern South Arabians, because modern South Arabians to this day, and particularly in the 1900s, are still quite a dark-skinned people. Various historians and travelers actually went to South Arabia and parts of the Arabian Peninsula and took photos of various different Arabian groups. And a lot of the Arabian groups that they took photos of were very dark-skinned people, like many of those quotes saying that they look like people from both sides of the Red Sea. And there's various books you can grab. And as you can see on my screen, I always have the book source to the left hand of the screen with images often to the right. But if you just take a minute to check these books out, they do show that these people of Arabia are quite dark-skinned, uh, going back to the 1930s and around that era of time. And even to this day, these people are still quite dark. And these are more of the indigenous, often Arabian tribes that live way out, not in the cities, but live as clans to this day. And it's actually kind of interesting how much they do look like people from the other side of the Red Sea, and even how they look like Dravidians, as some of those quotes have said. But these are just good examples of what Joktanites could have looked like. Basically being dark brown skinned, their hair will be scanty, basically not woolly, but also not straight. It'll be something more like a curly, really thick curly complexion or curly hair texture, with some hair being more loose than others, but some being, as you can see down below, more curly. But still, they would retain a dark skin complexion, dark eyes, and I think this is probably the best example of what early Proto-Arabs and Joktanites could have been. And again, you can find these photos from the books and from the sources that I have, like the Pitts Rivers Museum. Sir Arthur Keith and various anthropologists took multiple photos of these Arabian peoples, both in Yemen and Oman, Saudi Arabia, and various other parts of the Arabian Peninsula. But I do think it's just quite interesting that the book quotes, seeing the images of the people and attaching it with the book quotes, it's quite fascinating how, yeah, I can see why that they would say that there's a common stock between the peoples of Africa and the peoples of Arabia. So based on everything that we covered, basically we see that the Joktanites would have looked African. This is based on one, Eber and Azurad, Joktanites lineage being, Cushitic because of Azurad. Number two, Natufians, Joktanites lineage being both Asiatic and African if they descend from Natufians, because we know genetically speaking, indigenous Arabians are closest to Natufians. And then when it comes to Proto-Arabian skeleton remains of the pre-Islamic times, they look African and Dravidian. And historical quotes often say that Joktanites look African. Furthermore, when it comes to Sabaean statues, they look like modern Ethiopians. Southern Arabians to this day still look like people from the Horn of Africa or from India. And, seventhly, um, Joktanites settled in the Horn of Africa. So, as this quote, I think this is the best quote. The people of Darfur are of the Joktan tribe, the sons of Joktan, mentioned in Genesis. They are of Hamitic or African rather than Arab types. And I think that's the best way to go about the Joktanites, that they would have looked Hamitic or African. So basically, Joktanites looked Ethiopic, in my opinion. And Joktanites are remember, they are the purest and the most ancient of the Arabian types, according to their traditions. And remember, when it comes to the original Arab types, that the original Arab types look very similar to Afro-Egyptian types or Abyssinian types. And this is where we conclude our video. What did Joktanites look like? For our next video, it is Shem to Abraham, the patriarchs and the matriarchs genome. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like the video, click the bell, share the video, and please feel free to leave a comment. I will be sure to look at it and make sure that also keep in mind that I will one day have a Q&A where I can speak to you guys. And if you have any questions, again, just leave a comment and follow any of those social media apps that I mentioned earlier in the video. Thank you and have a great day.